This summer, mysterious circles appeared again in fields of crops all over the West Country. There's still no universally accepted explanation for these beautiful mysteries, although there have been many contenders, from electrified whirlwinds to intelligences from outer space. As the phenomenon has grown summer after summer, so too has the intensity of the battle between the competing explanations. And at the heart of that battle lies a struggle for the soul of science itself. For most of the year, the Westbury White Horse is the major tourist attraction in this part of Wiltshire. But then, as summer comes, a new tourist attraction springs up: crop circles. These circles, up to 300 feet in diameter, appear mysteriously, often at dead of night. Their remarkable geometric symmetry draws in thousands of visitors. Many are driven to do more than just look. They measure and record every detail of the circles. Throughout the summer months, new circles appear. Their imprint becomes even sharper in a ripe and brittle crop. For some visitors, crop circles are a source of creative inspiration.
Corn spiral dance was inspired by the crop circles at Silbury Hill in 1989. And the dance itself has a particular form. It's a very processional form. It also is, it has symbols in it of the crop itself, of corn. But it also has a section in it which is very unstructured. And that lack of structure, which mirrors really some of the energy that is often felt in these crop circles, a very spinning energy, very much mirrors the situation that we have, this challenge of these crop circles. We don't really understand them, we don't know what they're about. So we have the challenge between, if you like, the scientific form that we're used to and the metaphysical or the spiritual.
Others come into crop circles for psychic communion.
I had a very strong ET being coming through there with a silvery suit and 3 fingers and a very a rather interesting cummerbund that I see this one has got on as well. And this band I've had on other sort of spiritual energies that have come through, because they find the density of the earth, you know, the frequency of the earth is far too much for them to handle. And it appears this cummerbund around what we would know as the emotional centre kind of balances out the frequencies of their system.
The circle phenomenon is comparatively recent. 10 years ago, crop circles were virtually unknown. A handful of historic references have been unearthed, like this 1678 tract which attributes a circle in Hertfordshire to the devil. And some people remember seeing circles in the middle years of this century.
My family have farmed near Winchester in Hampshire for 30 years, and we've had circles, but never more exotic patterns, occurring in cornfields virtually throughout that period.
But the phenomenon only began to take off in 1980, when a photograph in a Wiltshire paper of a circle near Westbury White Horse sparked off circle spotting. The number of circles recorded has grown dramatically every year since then. By 1990, over 2,000 had been spotted all over the world. But they remain overwhelmingly a Wiltshire phenomenon. Over 50% of all the circles found since 1980 have been in Wiltshire. The circles have become part of local culture and commerce.
They're quite good business for the pub, and it was lucky that it happened around this area. We've had loads of people coming down, so we've got the corn circle cocktail going, which is quite good, which makes you see corn circles after you've drunk it.
Many people as we can on the floor for a corn circle dance. Go! 5, 6, 7, 8, and back. 2, 3, 4.
Most of the dancers at the Beckhampton Barn Dance are local farmers. For them, the circles have proved a mixed blessing.
And clap!
It was a Wednesday when they appeared, and that first weekend, there was probably 500 or 600 people went down into them. At that stage, I endeavoured to stop them by putting a sign up saying, please keep out, you're damaging the crop. That didn't work at all. I was trying to encourage them to go up on the hill behind to view them from up on the hill. But the need was to get in the circle and to feel any vibes that there might have been. So rather than discourage them, I put a caravan down a little chute, which was the only way into the field. So that was a fortunate point from my point of view of controlling people coming into the field. And people were very willing to come down, pay to go in and see them. And they were satisfied and I was satisfied. So yes, I mean about 5,000 to 7,000 people, I suppose, came through.
By last summer, crop circles had become big news far further afield than Wiltshire.
Somebody's only gone and trampled down our corn in the top field, that's all. It was flattened in shapes and patterns.
What's it mean?
It's a sign, if you ask me.
Sign of what?
The Lord works in mysterious ways.
As well as an Archer's storyline, they've appeared on album covers. And circles provided the basis for a surprise bestseller, which sold over 50,000 copies. What consumes people with curiosity about the phenomenon of the circles is what's actually making them.
Could be wind conditions and weather. Weather can play some interesting tricks.
I don't think it's the wind, because I don't think the wind would make it so even.
I think if it was aliens, why aren't they speaking to us in English? and what worries me about the circles is they're too kind of hieroglyphic. They're too symbolic, which makes me think that that it's wags. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me it's possible that it is a signature of some visitation to our planet. That's a possibility.
Well, they're not from the people upstairs. I think somebody's having a game.
We did a project on it, and our class reckoned it was hedgehogs. I did it.
What do you think they're all about? The circles in bloody corn, isn't it?
Attempts to resolve this mystery have reignited a smouldering dispute between two fundamentally opposed ways of interpreting the natural world.
I think what's interesting about crop circles are they are the latest in a long line of phenomena which characterize battles between science and parascience. And there's a number of examples of these kinds of phenomena, phrenology, UFOs, parapsychology. Now, looking back after these controversies are settled, it's often very hard to see what all the fuss was about. And it's often very hard to see what distinguishes the two sides one from another. But at the time of the controversy, the battle really rages and is extremely virulent in form. And that's where we are now with crop circles.
As I'm sure you've all seen before, is that the end one...
Since the 17th century, the prevailing way of interpreting the natural world has been that of orthodox science.
I stop that. We have got, in essence, if I do it with two, we have got
Newton's vision, refined and developed by 19th and 20th century physics, views the world as a system governed by implacable natural laws, accessible through the operations of logic and reason.
Newton's cradle. Simple example of the idea of the third law of motion. So if we were to try and...
Generations of school children have learnt the fundamental approach of orthodox science to natural phenomena. Hypothesis, verified and refined through the collection of data by experiment, leading ultimately to proof.
Science looks at the natural world because that's its job, and of course it will be looking at objects and phenomena which parascientists are also interested in. I think the difference is in the logical approach which scientists take. If there is a phenomenon, like your corn circles, like dowsing or something, the scientists will say, well now, does this in any way fit in with a pattern of what we know and understand? Form a hypothesis. Could it be such and such a thing? What tests have we to make? And are there any sort of null tests on other manifestations? So it tries to take a logical approach to things. Try this, does it work? Try that, does it work? And this is a natural, logical way of going about things.
But there's another approach to understanding natural phenomena. Although its roots go back to before Newtonian science, it's primarily a reaction against the domination of a mechanistic approach.
Now, most people these days consider parascience to be things like parapsychology, astrology, graphology, palmistry, all of those studies which are outside of the accepted norms of the establishment academic view of science. So what we're talking about really are people who study things that don't fit in with the classical Newtonian reductionist mechanistic view that the Western world has held for the last 300 years.
I think we're all interested in mystery. We all prefer to think that there are mysteries out there, that science can't boil down to boring equations. And in some ways, I think this has grown in the past 20 or 30 years. And in many ways, I date it to the 60s, to the beginning of the realization that experts, that scientists, had somehow got something a bit wrong. And that something was largely, I reckon, nuclear power. That the reassurances and the promises given about nuclear power turned out in a way to be wrong. And it was from that a sort of doubt about the expert, about whether to believe him or not, has been creeping in more and more.
What's very common in episodes of this kind is that the different parties involved are very keen to appropriate the phenomena for themselves over which they're arguing. They want to define, to colonize the phenomena for their own purposes. Now, in situations where the stakes are very high, where this involves a battle for turf, it can be very important to knock out the other side completely. This may account for the particular virulence of a particular episode, a particular controversy over a new kind of phenomenon.
The worldview that we were brought up in basically said we know everything there is. It's a clockwork universe, we can explain it all, we can predict it all, there's no mystery left. And crop circles have been a very public, very obvious mystery. There's a lot of magic around them, and people love mystery and magic.
The public understanding of science is very important, and maybe things like this, phenomena like the crop circles, are a very good way for scientists to get into the business of public understanding of science. The trouble is that you find yourself in what you might call very mixed company. And it's all very well on a program like this, discussing fairly seriously what's happening, but you do find yourself amongst people who use terms very loosely, you know, energy and ley lines and all this sort of rubbish, and the discussion becomes very, very difficult because they are convinced of a deep psychic significance in these things, and they're unbudgeable. And the conversations with people like that, who are emotionally involved, I may say, become really rather pointless. So there's a balance, again, that you have to strike. You have to say, I would like to enter into a serious discussion, and we will use the corn circles as an example of the scientific method. On the other hand, if you find yourself in a kind of a séance with people who are completely hooked on the unknown, then it's a fairly profitless business.
Scientists have vied with parascientists in analysing the complex patterns of corn within the circles and their remarkable sharp-edged symmetry. No blade of corn has remained unexamined in each side's attempt to produce a universally accepted explanation compatible with their own particular worldview. For many adherents of parascience, the basis of an explanation starts with a circle's geographical location. In the 1960s, Neolithic monuments like Silbury Hill came to be seen as embodiments of mystical power. Hippies flocked to the sites dotted throughout Wiltshire. And their belief that powerful but inexplicable spiritual energies flow from such sites has since taken root in a wider community. Dowsing, an ancient craft still used by many farmers to locate sources of water, has become a popular way of trying to locate spiritual energies. The traditional hazelwood twig has been replaced by metal rods. Dowsers believe they'll cross over or open out when held over sources of water or energy.
When I talk about energy, I don't mean it in the sense of raw electricity or something like that, which can be picked up on a meter. I'm looking at it from the point of view that we are like a battery, and our hands show a plus and minus in effect, and we are picking up that energy, which we believe to be electromagnetic or electrostatic.
And to many dowsers, the mysterious crop circles are potent sources of such energy.
I'm now walking into the energy field here, and as we come into the energy field, the rods automatically open like that. Now, you may feel that, having all watched the Paul Daniels show, that this is a very easy bit of magic to detect. So I'm going to show you that it isn't an involuntary reflex of my hands. I've got here two holders made out of barrows, and in this way I shan't actually be touching the rods at all as I come in. And I step gently back again out of the energy field. There's a bit of a wobble on them, obviously because of the wind, but if we walk gently into the energy field here like that, you'll see that exactly the same thing in fact happens. So that dowsing is a reality, it works.
Many dowsers believe that the energy coming off crop circles flows from invisible lines of energy known as ley lines, which crisscross the globe linking spiritual centers. They find crop circles to be in alignment with the ley lines, and they believe there's some causal connection between the two.
Ley lines I believe to be some form of energy. In this context, I believe them to be lines of geomagnetic force linked to the Earth's magnetic field. It's believed that some of the standing stones actually act as receptors, if you like, to this energy, and that people in our ancient ancestors, Neolithic past, and perhaps people who have certain psychic gifts are able to use this area to actually enhance their psychic abilities.
The mystery of the circles has attracted nothing like the same interest from orthodox scientists. Most seem to have found the phenomenon not worthy of the effort of explanation. But one lonely voice has been arguing his case for 11 years now, against the intuitive explanation of dowsers and in favor of a scientific analysis.
So I am indeed fighting for science and against the irrationalities of the paranormal people.
Terence Meaden is an academic physicist by training who's been obsessed with the circles ever since he first came across them. A local Wiltshireman, he spent 9 years abroad, teaching solid-state physics in the universities of Grenoble in France and Dalhousie in Canada. In 1974, he inherited his father's motor business and returned to Wiltshire with his young family to run it. Today, his son runs the business of restoring classic cars, while Terence Meaden runs a different scientific concern from above the garage.
On returning to Britain, I decided that I would create a business in meteorology. It's one of the easier subjects for a fully qualified physicist to handle, and I had always maintained a deep interest in meteorology.
Meaden's business, Toro, comprises a scientific monthly, the Journal of Meteorology, and a meteorological consultancy selling advice to insurance companies. His expertise in this field led the government to commission him to write a report assessing the risk of tornado damage to the Sizewell nuclear reactor. A tornado is just one dramatic and destructive variety of a common phenomenon, the atmospheric vortex, a mass of swirling, spinning air. Meaden's background in the study of vortices immediately suggested a cause for the mysterious circles which he first learnt about from a photo in the Wiltshire Times in 1980.
Now that attracted my attention at once because the circularity and the spiral lie of the corn made me think at once, this is the sort of thing that an atmospheric vortex could make. Now a primary difficulty is that in the fair weather whirlwind, the inflow of air is such that the motion is upwards, and such motion could never of itself create a crop circle, which is clearly made by downward flow. So I suppose that if a fair weather whirlwind had been involved, something must have happened to it to cause it to temporarily give a downrush of air.
Terence Meaden spent the next few summers patrolling high vantage points around the White Horse looking for circles. His growing data bank suggested a connection with Wiltshire's topography as circles tended to form at the foot of hills. Research also suggested they formed in calm weather conditions. This indicated to Meaden a possible mechanism for his vortex. Meaden's diagram shows how a rising wind can affect calm air in the lee of a hill and generate an upward spinning air column. As in a tornado, the complex interaction between the upward flow and its spinning component can become unstable and create a downflowing system, the bulge in the column. If the spinning bulge reaches the ground, a spiral-centered mark is carved in the crop.
I mean, I could oversimplify it by saying that the air is rushing in so efficiently that it's coming in faster than it can get out. And this leads to a kind of bulge in the middle. And then this bulge releases its tension by breaking away downwards, in fact.
But that on its own doesn't account for the circle's characteristic sharp edge. According to Meaden, the spinning component of the vortex lays down the corn in a spiral. But the electrification of the air by spinning creates a state known as a plasma, a quasi-solid with a defined shell. This gives the vortex, in effect, a cutting edge which lays the crop precisely. Meaden christened this phenomenon a plasma vortex. According to Meaden, this theory explained all the occurrences of the single, simple circles that had first caught his attention.
But here we've got the standard evidence for descent of a vortex. Implied by the center here is axial symmetry. The whirling vortex that made the circle came down, and in a matter of probably less than a second, it spun out this little circle.
But by 1983, circles weren't always single. However, Terence Meaden felt the basic hypothesis of a plasma vortex could still explain new, larger groupings of circles.
It seems highly probable that quintuplet sets of circles cannot be formed in any other way except by the breakup at the moment of impact with the ground of a vortex which was bearing within itself 4 smaller vortices.
Presenting a refined hypothesis was one thing, but Meaden encountered more difficulty with the next stage of the scientific process, verifying it. Up until this summer, he'd made a start by collecting together a body of eyewitness reports of circles being formed, which he believes vindicates his case.
It was very much like cutting a flan. That was the thing that struck me, cutting a flan out of a tin with one of these flan cutters that go round. The line started at about 1 o'clock and rotated back to the start position. Took about 4 seconds to cut the circle down.
We found ourselves in a circle being pushed, and from inward going outward we started noticing little spirals, a little vortex like fog. They were like fog, not too dense, almost like fog, misty appearance, and they were shimmering. And this was sort of wrapping around the cone at that sort of angle, going round like that, anti-clockwise, and swirling round the cone, and the cone dropping.
Orthodox science doesn't believe that such eyewitness reports, however convincing and accurately remembered and reported, can be a substitute for controlled experimental verification in laboratory conditions. Up until now, Terence Meaden's scarce resources made this impossible. But this summer, help finally began to arrive, but not from fellow scientists in Britain. Professor Yoshihiko Otsuki of Waseda University in Tokyo and his team of researchers have proved one of Terence Meaden's most invaluable allies. Otsuki brings resources and vital credibility to Meaden's hitherto isolated research program. A distinguished radiation physicist, Otsuki studies ball lightning, mysterious lights in the lower atmosphere. He believes that ball lightning, or as he calls it, plasma fire, is electrified air like Meaden's plasma vortex. But ball lightning leaves no trace, which accounts for Otsuki's interest in crop circles.
In crop circles, see, there are very nice mark patterns in crop circle. So this is very nice for the research works of plasma vortex or the natural plasma fire.
But despite many attempts, Otsuki has been unable to prove the existence of ball lightning in the laboratory until recently. Pumping microwaves into a specially built apparatus, he believes he has artificially created ball lightning. What's most encouraging for Meaden is that the plasma fire leaves marks when a plate of aluminium dust is placed in the apparatus. For dust marks read crop circles. But despite this circumstantial support for the plasma theory, the phenomenon has still not yielded up its mystery. This summer has seen new and increasingly complicated patterns in the crops, which has kept the controversy vigorously bubbling over. Over the last 2 years, crop circles have begun to grow increasingly and spectacularly complex. In 1990, 1/3 of the circles in Wiltshire were these complex shapes, so-called pictograms. By this year, the overwhelming majority of the circles in Wiltshire were pictograms. This has caused a new controversy to blow up over Meaden's explanation that plasma vortices are responsible.
The problem about the crop formations is that they started in a very small way 10 years ago, and they have been growing in elaboration. You can trace patterns of development over the succeeding years. In the last 2 years, they've become enormous. They've become immensely complicated. And nature as a whole doesn't perform like this. in this sort of way with this sort of thing. Now, if this is a, say, let us argue, a wind formation, a very strange sort of wind, shall we, let's say, call it the plasma vortex effect. Now, if the plasma vortex effect is a true hypothesis, it should have been going on for thousands of years. There should have been formations like this all over England and the world, seen by people and recorded for hundreds of years. And yet there's no evidence at all that this is the case. So we are dealing with something that's quite different from a natural effect of nature. And this is why I think we have to move into a new paradigm, which involves intelligence, something purposive, and something quite different from what we are used to in the late 20th century.
In 1990, a new organisation was set up to monitor the circles and look for new explanations.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the summer conference of the Centre for Crop Circle Studies.
The Centre for Crop Circle Studies, or CCCS, which now has 950 members, is the brainchild of two men. Michael Green, the chairman, is an archaeologist working for English Heritage. And Ralph Noyes, the secretary, is a retired under-secretary from the Ministry of Defence. Both had developed a fascination with the circles, but found themselves dissatisfied with Meaden's scientific explanation.
I think a decisive moment for me was the moment in 1986 when these circles, which had begun to group themselves into quite interesting patterns, for the first time put a ring around themselves. We had a ring circle. Terence, I think, found this very surprising, and he had to elaborate his model quite a bit. And I began to feel we really have got a most interesting race between a good scientist and a developing phenomenon. In 1989, we had, right at the end of that year, a very big rotational event divided into 4 quadrants, in each of which the grain was combed out in a linear manner, turning at right angles in each quadrant. And I said to myself and to friends, that cannot be simply an atmospheric vortex, however elaborate Terence is making it. Let us have a look at this thing.
The point is that
CCCS acts as an umbrella organisation for all those who lean towards a parascientific explanation. Some continue to believe the circles derive from spiritual force fields like ley lines. But influential members at the core of the organisation are developing an alternative theory, that the circles are the work of non-human intelligences.
He said, you've actually recorded this scientifically. A lot of people are looking for messages in the corn, as it were, nowadays. I'm tempted almost to say corny messages. Now, I think one has to put one's self in the shoes, if that's not too far-fetched a term, for an intelligence coming from outside. How would you try and communicate with a skeptical, unbelieving human public? One of the ways I think I would try would not be to write great big letters, "We are here, we love you," across the middle of the fields of England. And I think one positive way, a timeless way, is to use something which they call in the East a mandala. Now, this is a symbol of reality, a symbol of being, a symbol of God. And most of the formations that we've been looking at this year and here are, in fact, great symbols in this sense.
Those who believe this theory argue it hasn't been arrived at lightly. As well as rejecting the plasma vortex hypothesis, CCCS examines other possibilities like electromagnetic or agricultural change. They believe that such phenomena cannot on their own explain the circles and are forced to conclude a non-human intelligence can be the only possible explanation. When this parascientific theory began to surface, Terence Meaden immediately dismissed it. He explained pictograms scientifically, making only a relatively minor modification to his theory. He suggested that sunspots, solar storms which cause intense electrical activity in the upper atmosphere and which have an 11-year cycle that peaked in 1990, were exaggerating the unstable behavior of his plasma vortices.
I'm merely suggesting that in addition, there could be earth circulating currents induced by the upper air currents, which in turn affect locally the electric field of the Earth, and hence play a role too in the stability or instability of the vortices that make the circles.
Meaden's modification failed to convince the parascientists, who argued that while violent solar events may well wreak havoc on Earth, it's inherently implausible that they could effect designer damage. Science and parascience continue to be locked in conflict, leaving many locals who've experienced crop circles at first hand uncertain what to think.
Quite a nice. Yes. I think this was probably standing up a little bit when it was formed. A little bit like that, I would guess.
Yes, it would have been.
And that's now been knocked over by people walking on it.
Terence Meaden and CCCS field officer Dowser Richard Andrews both try to win farmer Robin Butler over to their understanding of the cause of pictograms. He's had 27 simple circles before, but this is his first pictogram.
It seems from the dowsing point of view that when we have a three-line lay, as we call it, goes across the portion of the dumbbell at 90 degrees to this pattern, it seems we get boxes. And if that isn't there, there isn't a box. So these are sort of the things that we're beginning to learn now, which is helping us both, really, isn't it?
Indeed, yes.
The apparent inability of both science and parascience to prove their case conclusively, and the strange and sudden complexity of the pictograms, however, has encouraged a third theory to emerge with particular force over the last couple of years.
But if we move over to the edges, you'll see that...
I think the cause of crop circles is human beings. I think every single one has been made by a so-called hoaxer who's gone out and done it at dead of night or whatever.
You're looking for a few of the RAF military types, I think, you know. They like that sort of thing. I'm ex-military myself, and I would like to have a bash or something like that.
I'm certain someone stands in the middle with a piece of wood and a rope and goes around. I mean, I was born on a farm. I was brought up on a farm all my life. 100% country, hate town, but never in this wide world is that little green man.
Therefore, you come round to the other theory. They can't be little men. They must be big, large countrymen.
The young farmers. They know exactly what they're doing, so they do a minimum amount of damage, and that's a bit unfair. I better go away before I say any more. My son-in-law's a young farmer.
But originally, the circles or rings here in this photograph are not hoaxing. But the other extra pattern will be hoaxing. This, I think it's impossible to create such a very complicated patterns by plasma vortex.
This summer has, for the first time, seen the emergence of admitted hoaxers into the open. Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley were discovered by Today newspaper. They claim to have invented the whole phenomenon in 1978, and they've made contradictory claims to varying numbers of circles. Others began hoaxing for the first time this year. A group of physicists from Southampton University, calling themselves the Wessex Sceptics, set out this summer to show how easy it was to make a crop circle.
We were struck last year, which was 1990, of course, there were an enormous number of pictograms, and we found it very difficult to believe that those were produced by a natural phenomenon. It doesn't mean we were right, we just found it very difficult to believe. Now, given that we were told that the structure of the pictograms, the way the crop was laid out, was laid down in the pictogram, you know, the detailed way in which it fell, was identical to the simple circles. We, of course, were led to the conclusion if the pictograms were not a natural phenomenon, then there was no reason to suppose the circles were either.
The Wessex Sceptics attracted the opposition of both Meaden and CCCS, who accused them of interfering with their attempts to solve this mystery.
I consider these hoaxes a complete waste of time. It costs a lot of people a lot of money, photography, flying aircraft, And of course, time is the essence of our research. CCCS has been set up to solve the problems of the corn circle in the sense that we will look into the hoaxing problem and we will find ways of beating it.
Actually, we suspect you of hoaxing other circles. There have been so many done this year. We know you've made some, and we suspect you've made others you've not told us about.
You've seen the ones we've made. We made them in Chris Cutler's farm. I assume you've been there, or somebody in
Yes,
one of your
we've
group
been
has
there.
been there. Our point is
that you have made others too.
You have created, that you've given us.
Do
You are now giving us criteria.
But have
which
you
we
made
can-
any or not?
Yes, we've made circles.
Other than the ones at Chris Cutler's farm and these?
Have I made any other than those? Yes, I've made some. Yes.
Well, I will.
However,
we better have a
the
list.
point is, we are now learning. We are now learning
We're
how to hoax them
suggesting
better.
that you are the hoaxer.
You think that that's a
in
very
some cases.
irresponsible thing to do?
We're stuck in Southampton. We have very little time to come up
No,
here.
look, you admit you make circles. We've never made any ourselves. We're finding
Well,
them.
maybe you should try to make them.
And
Don't you
we
think you
found
should try to make them?
we
to
found
see-
some hoax circles. We think you've made more than you've told us about.
Don't you think you should try to make some and see whether you can duplicate the effects you think you see?
But the skeptics persist. They believe creating circles is a good way of testing the validity of the rival theories. If the theory is good in their view, it ought to be able to distinguish a naturally created circle from a man-made one.
The farmers are finding them now.
Equinox filmed them making a circle in a field belonging to an organic farm run by Martin Pitt, just outside Marlborough. They created one main circle with 3 satellite circles placed away from the tractor tram lines.
Pick your way through here very carefully. Yeah. Then go and get that. I'll drop this down here. Then we'll go and get it. Right, okay.
That circle was extremely ambitious in the sense that we decided to make one fairly large. We decided to make one that would look as though it was made by a plasma vortex. We had all sorts of fancy stuff, quite a lot of organisation, and we started designing it a couple of days before. Then things started to go wrong when we first came into the field and realised that our original site, rather ironically, was wrecked by wind damage, so we had to move to a different site. We had to redesign it, and we had to reassign roles at very short notice. So there was a certain amount of chaos when we went into the field, but the surveying was fairly successful. And we then just reverted to a very crude technique of rolling and trampling, just to actually produce something that might look good from the air, but we don't really know.
6 days later, the hoax was discovered independently. A field officer from the Centre for Crop Circle Studies, Busty Taylor, doused it to find out if it was genuine, and then he gave his opinion.
That we have a really complex one here, and it's absolutely amazing what this is telling us here. We have the opposite rotation, which we had in 1989. We have the quarter sections appearing, the petal sections appearing. It's really a cracker.
Terence Meaden also discovered its existence independently, and he too verified it.
The circle formation on Martin Pitt's land consisted of simple round circles, which pleased me very much to see, because they were so typical of the ones I've been looking at all these years. They didn't have those complex, strange shapes which so many other systems have had this year and last year. But in detail, they had a lot of complex structure, a kind of petal effect, a braiding, a plaiting, and a layering, which showed the difficulty that any hoaxer would have to manage to contrive to follow if he wished to copy it. In fact, it was a system that was too hard to copy, and yet was of the simple variety nevertheless. Genuine in every way.
Admittedly, the Wessex Sceptics were able to make their circle with the permission of the farmer, who cleared away damning evidence of human involvement, like 2 forgotten balls of string. So they haven't quite proved their case about how easy it is to make the circles and convince experts of their authenticity. In any event, neither dupers nor duped attach too much significance to the success of this particular hoax.
So you are telling me that the circles on Martin Pitt's farm are hoax circles made by the Wessex Sceptics. I have to admit that some people, at least, if they are scientifically trained, are capable of perpetrating at least one hoax. That does not, however, negate all the positive evidence which has been gathered over the last 10 years in favour of genuine circles. When a scientific theory is complete, then it would be possible to distinguish between hoax circles and genuine circles. But we are not yet quite at that stage. The theory is undergoing development and modification according to the incoming data.
Owing to the fact that we are producing books with photography showing the lay of the corn, it would be possible for individuals to go out and recreate circles. It isn't off the cards, it's on the cards. That is highly possible. But not all of them. No way. Too many. 750 in Beckhampton last year, that's a lot of work. All night. Worldwide, how do they do that? It's just one of those things that you will get people doing daft things. I regret it, the farmers definitely regret it, and I just wish they'd come to their senses and realise it is a waste of time.
Unfortunately, the hoax hypothesis suffers from a weakness that the plasma vortex theory doesn't suffer from. The people who propose that don't claim that all circles are caused by plasma vortices, so they don't have to go out and select every single circle and prove it. Now, there's no way we can prove that every circle has been made by hoaxes, of course not. We can simply throw doubt or examine the ability of the people who claim to be able to distinguish classes of patterns and say one is artificial and one is natural. We can test that ability. Of course, that's a very difficult test to do. In principle, it can be done. That won't prove that they're natural or artificial. After all, it's quite possible that people may be able to simulate what is also a natural phenomenon. There's no reason why they can't, in principle, do that.
All sides are still assessing the implications of a summer of hoaxing. The case for all circles being hoaxes is still not proven. If hoaxers are making all the circles, they've been working quietly and consistently for over a decade. They've remained undetected despite nights like the 16th of July this year, when in Wiltshire alone 3 massive formations were made. So the cognoscenti of the circles remain convinced that they can't all be hoaxes. The degree of organisation and mentality required is for them beyond belief. Nor does the hoax theory account for eyewitness reports of circles being formed, although anecdotal evidence is always open to doubt. So all sides are still working on their theories as the battleground turns to bread.
Is this very large story about hoax going to do us damage or may it benefit us? Well, it's going to do some damage to the subject in the short term, because any serious research organisation, like a university department, who might have been interested, and we think some might have been quite soon, in giving us a bit of funding for research, is going to shy off at the moment. Until this flurry has passed, any sensible university is going to keep itself rather well away from the field. But in the long run, and quite quickly, I think this is going to benefit us enormously, because it has brought out into the open what the discussion is all about. Either this thing is Terence Meaden's vortex and the rest is hoax, or it is something more as well.
And after a summer of many hoaxes, Terence Meaden has refined his theory still further.
We are now quite certain that all the most complex systems, the pictograms, are definitely fakes, because these are the very systems, the complex systems, which were always going to be difficult for a scientific theory to grapple with. We are really only left with the simple circle cases as being those which are likely to be quite genuine. The theory already describes these very well, and we are likely to go into next season more strongly placed than ever before.
However probable or improbable impartial observers may find each or all of the competing explanations, conclusive proof of any of them is still lacking. Terence Meaden hasn't yet achieved such definite proof. In its absence, orthodox science has failed to prevent other explanations rushing in to claim the territory. And next summer, battle is likely to be joined again, and will continue until one side or the other lands a knockout blow.
At last it's being realised that the burden of proof must surely lie on those who think crop circles are made by agents other than man. The analogy that I like to give is that I have never seen a car being made in a factory. I don't know that cars are made in factories. Yet, surely, the burden of proof is on someone to persuade me that cars are not made in factories, because I've seen plenty of evidence that they can be made in factories.
What is needed in order to reach forwards and approach the answer more quickly is, of course, moving film of some of these events as they occur. That's what we're really after.
It's clear in my mind that whatever is making these formations is not amused by humanity, human individuals, trying to catch it out. It may be they'd be more amused if we actually tried to reach out and contact them.
I think after the events of the summer, the debate over crop circles is still very much open. And I would expect that to remain the situation until there's some marked redistribution of resources between the different parties. If one or other party to the dispute is able to recruit some further allies to its side, if, for example, one party is able to recruit the assistance and methods of a particular subdiscipline, then we might begin to see some closure on the debate. And of course it has to be said that it's much more difficult for the parascientists to recruit that kind of extra resource. But until the situation does show a change of resources, I think things are very much open. It is, you could say, very much a field open to anyone.